Hello, and thank you for viewing this presentation, produced for the 2021 virtual assembly of the Wooden Canoe Heritage Association. This slideshow will showcase some of the lost wooden canoe history in Canada's largest urban centre. Most of you are aware that the city of Peterborough in eastern Ontario was the historical centre of canoe manufacturing in Canada. But Toronto, located about 70 miles to the southwest on the north shore of Lake Ontario, also once had a thriving wooden canoe building industry. City directory listings from the 1890s reveal over a dozen local builders, many of whom also ran successful livery operations. Unfortunately, as we'll see, nearly all traces of this enterprising time have been permanently lost due to the relentless pressures of urban development. Lake Ontario isn't the most ideal body of water for paddling pursuits. Prevailing winds from the southwest can create dangerous waves, and there are underlying currents just a few miles offshore. Because of this, there were limited spots in the city where canoeists could enjoy relatively safe waters. These canoeing focal points were found in the Old Inner Harbor, the island lagoons about a mile offshore, and in the vicinity of the Humber River and adjacent Sunnyside Beach in the western reaches of the city. In the early years, owners of expensive wooden watercraft would simply store their boats in private sheds along the lakefront. By the late 1880s, many enthusiasts had formally organized into a series of aquatic clubs, which were initially concentrated together in the Old Harbor. This is an early 20th century aerial photograph of the Inner Harbor looking north. For those of you who might be familiar with the city today, here are a few visible landmarks. The main road near the center of the image is York Street, with Bay Street descending down to the lake on the right side. The multi-story structure located at the water's edge near the foot of Bay is the Harbor Commission building, where incoming cargo and international passenger service would dock for customs inspection. In the midst of all this commercial activity were the various waterfront clubs protruding onto the lake on jetties leased from the Harbor Commission. Sparing no expense, these early clubhouses were more like picturesque mansions, meant to reflect a certain degree of prestige and exclusivity. The Toronto Canoe Club, located on the second jetty, built this fancy clubhouse with its irregular roofline and distinct pointed turret in 1893. Multiple storage sheds behind the main building had sufficient space to house hundreds of canoes of various sizes, an early reflection of the popularity of the pastime. Eventually, a symbiotic relationship developed between these clubs and local boat builders, who set up shop constructing a variety of wooden craft in this area. Behind the fourth jetty was Acroid Brothers Boat Shop, a maker of canoes, but whose primary focus were 14-foot wooden sailing dinghies. Acroid's storefront also had a distinct sign advertising sale of their select canoe paddles. Of most relevance to our discussion, though, is that Toronto's most prolific canoe builder, Walter Dean, quite fittingly had his second boat shop behind the storage sheds of the Toronto Canoe Club. Dean was actively building canoes for the club membership at this location from 1912 until the facility succumbed to fire in February of 1920. A lively photo from the summer of 1906 showcases the clubhouse festooned with flags and its terraces packed with spectators. Canoes are being launched from the storage ports on the lower level down into the water via a gently sloping dock. More organized events, hosted by the club, were primarily based on the canoe sailing discipline, as illustrated by this undated photo from the club's archives. Also very popular were the large war canoe races that pitted teams of 15 paddlers against each other. The organized competitions became so synonymous with the Inner Harbor that postcards were printed from the era showcasing the excitement. The building of these massive 30-foot all-wood canoes proved to be a financial mainstay for Walter Dean, who not only built these craft for the Toronto Canoe Club, but also for competing clubs throughout Ontario and the United States. Dean would often attribute the success of championship teams specifically to his own boat design. A promotional postcard from 1905 highlights this fact. A line at the bottom of the card boasts that, quote, Dean's canoes hold all the championships of America. Single and double racing canoes were also a major portion of Walter Dean's business. A very aggressive marketer, Dean would often take out ads in a variety of popular magazines, focusing on the success of his designs. Slogans such as "The Dean Canoe Always Leads," or "Dean Canoes Must Paddle Easy, for they always win," emphasized the confidence the boat builder had in his craft. Of particular note was his claim of a unique deck structure, which he of course called the Dean Deck, a heavily peaked triangular design meant to provide splash coverage from oncoming waves, but also to add a distinctive sporty flair to his craft. It was a feature he would eventually apply to his line of non-racing recreational canoes. Dean's other claim was his superior building method. Promoted as close-ribbed and metal joint construction, it utilized a long strip of brass shaped like a staple to seal gaps between the wood planks, thereby maintaining a waterproof hull with a smooth outer surface. This construction technique had already been developed as the flush metallic batten system by competing builders in Peterborough, but it was Dean who seemed to capitalize on the method by spending a relatively significant amount of his budget on marketing. The popularity of these clubs in the industrial zone of the Inner Harbor eventually caused conflict with the Harbor Commission. Casual paddlers would often congregate in clusters of floating watercraft, forming a navigation hazard for powered vessels. Many enthusiastic canoeists, with little knowledge of maritime laws, would approach dangerously close to commercial watercraft. Newspapers of the times even reported on the exciting new sport of ferry coasting, where canoes would surf the wake of various steamships in the harbor. It was said that one could make the mile-long crossing to the island lagoons without a single forward stroke, but the risky maneuver, more often, would swamp or flip over a narrow open canoe. Photos taken by a passenger standing on the stern deck of one such ferry crossing showcase some daredevils trying to impress with a series of risky balancing stunts. Collisions and other fatal accidents began to mount, as newspaper headlines increasingly reported on dramatic rescues and tragic drownings. The area gained a reputation as a dangerous place for canoeing, with both city officials and the public clamoring that something be done. Prompted in part by this pressure, the Harbor Commission decided to immediately terminate all the leases of the waterfront clubs in the summer of 1920. This photograph from 1921 reveals the abandoned shells of the once glorious clubhouses right before they were demolished. At the same time, the city began an aggressive campaign of infilling the harbor, thereby ensuring that this spot would never again be used for recreational activities. Take note of the Harbor Commission building at the far right again. Once located at the water's edge, the building now sits marooned, about 350 yards from the current waterfront. The original spot of the Toronto Canoe Club, Acroid Brothers and Dean's Boat Shops, now sit under layers of concrete supporting an expressway and condo towers. In 2014, excavations in the area unearthed the wooden pilings which once supported the jetty walkways. As a result of the city's plan for the harbor, canoeists were forced to move, with many now focusing on the island lagoons. Postcards from the era reveal some idyllic paddling spots where protected waters allowed for safe recreation. Paddling under the island's many bridges seemed to be a popular pastime. Often, large parties would cross over, erect tents, and camp overnight as a sort of in-city wilderness experience. The focal point of activity on the islands was located at Center Island. Here, the ornately constructed lagoon bridge crosses over the main channel. Occupying prime real estate at this intersection was the largest boathouse of the area, the red-roofed English Boathouse, operated by Edward English and his descendants. The boathouse was not as ornate as the old Toronto Canoe Club, but still housed an impressive fleet and repair shop. For multiple generations, folks could rent high-quality wooden canoe craft to ply these placid waters, until again the city government intervened. In 1959, it was decided to convert much of the island property into public parkland and demolish any business structures not operated by the city. Today, the former spot of English's Boathouse is home to manicured grass and a few park benches. Recently, a memorial plaque has been put up by a local historical society, marking this once important landmark to local canoe culture. Another early 20th century photo reveals a regatta event with English's Boathouse and the lagoon bridge in the distance. Extensive crowds crammed the shore waiting for the event to start, an indicator of the popularity of these events for city inhabitants. The bridge conveniently marked the finish line of each race, with winners passing under the arches to cheering fans. The location today is much more quiet, but still plays host to annual paddling events. Now, however, corporate-sponsored teams of dragon boats have supplanted the original wooden canoe races of the area. Perhaps the most popular focal point for paddlers was in the western end of Toronto, around the vicinity of the largest river system in the city, the Humber. The river's gentle flow continually discharged a silty sediment that naturally landed on the adjacent shore to the east, creating one of the city's finest beaches known as Sunnyside. It was at this location, sandwiched between the Grand Trunk railway tracks and the waterfront, that Walter Dean set up his first boat shop at the back of his home, operational from 1889 to 1911. Photos from its last year at this spot reveal an extensive series of building add-ons, indicative of his business expansion from his founding year. A rare close-up shot reveals an outdoor tarped area along the side of the building, converted into a workspace. The canoe visible in the image is another close-ribbed style boat, built in the well-known Peterborough style. Around this time, Dean proudly launched his own custom design, adapted from his experience with racing hulls. Highly popular with the recreational crowd, no doubt because of his incessant marketing, the Sunnyside Cruiser model would eventually form the overwhelming majority of his canoe business. A no-nonsense, flat-bottomed hull with nearly level shear line helped with primary stability and tracking, while his peak deck design gave the hull a modern, albeit radical sporty style for the time. In typical Dean fashion, this 1910 advertisement boasts that, quote, "it is the most remarkable model ever made." A rival to the Toronto Canoe Club in the Inner Harbour, the Parkdale Canoe Club was established just a short walk west from Dean's location. Dean's commercial success in the area quickly prompted other boat builders and livery operators to set up shop in what would become a competitive area for canoe businesses in the city. Squeezed in between the Parkdale Canoe Club and Dean's factory were two more shops. The boat building / livery business of Isaac Devons and Benjamin Orr seemed to have the largest billboard in the area, tempting the many pedestrians at the nearby level railway crossing to rent one of their canoes. A few doors down was the establishment of Robert Maw, a retired Atlantic Ocean schooner captain. Surviving canoes from this area are rare, and only 2 of Ma's canoes are known to be in existence today. One is at the Canadian Canoe Museum, the other in the private collection of Peter Breen. Peter's canoe is a 14.5-foot long wide board made of cedar rather than the more commonly found basswood. The hull was stripped and refinished over the winter of 2020, as shown in these photos courteously shared by Peter. With all these canoe operations to choose from, the beachfront would typically be filled with canoes on fine weather days, while many casual walkers along the boardwalk would take in the view. Sunnyside became synonymous with casual canoe fun. Relatively shallow waters meant good times could be had by the city's children. Look how many youngsters have crammed into this wooden canoe that still maintains a bit of buoyancy without the need for flotation tanks on modern designs. After World War I, the city came up with a plan to convert much of Sunnyside Beach into an elaborate amusement park, complete with merry-go-rounds, roller coasters, and carnival-like concession stands. When his second boat shop, located in the inner harbor behind the Toronto Canoe Club, was destroyed by fire, Dean was able to secure a new lease at the eastern end of the proposed park grounds. The building, constructed in the Art Deco style associated with the era, finally opened in 1922 as Dean's Sunnyside and Pleasure Boats, with Dean's 2 sons taking over the business. The waterfront side of the building featured ornate mahogany-framed windows and attractive railings. Arched canoe ports provided quick access to the fleet, which could easily be launched from the gently sloping deck. Unfortunately, business at this location was marginally successful at best, as it was difficult to compete with all the excitement of nearby amusement rides. Dean's Boat and Canoe Works declared bankruptcy in 1931, ending the boat-building enterprise that had begun in 1889. The building, however, became a successful dance hall and concert venue, the Palais Royal. It is the only one of the old canoe buildings that still stand in Toronto today. Additions to the original structure have changed the overall look. Gone are the mahogany-framed windows and wooden terrace, now replaced with generic metal railings. The arched canoe ports that once housed beautiful wooden canoe craft are sadly now permanently blocked off from the water by a concrete retaining wall and modern deck. Still, it is a nice spot to visit and contemplate the heyday of wooden canoes in the city. Near the mouth of the Humber River were even more competing builders and livery operators. Perhaps the most successful operations were those of Octavius Lang Hicks. Not only just a boat builder, Hicks was a successful local businessman and held several patents for bridge construction, in addition to being a hotel owner and operating a brickmaking factory. Initially setting up his first boat shop on the property in front of his hotel, Hicks would go on to expand and move locations, hopping from one side of the river bank to the other before settling into his final location on the west side. Like Dean's spot a little to the east, Hicks's success encouraged more operators to follow. Eventually, the area became quite crowded with boat shops, such as Isaac Devon's Riverview, McGraw's Boathouse, and Jack's Boat Livery. In this photo, Hicks stands in front of his second boathouse location with part of the fleet in the background. His daughter Hannah poses with a double-bladed paddle while seated in a graceful-looking Hicks-built canoe. Another photo taken on the same day showcases the differences in designs popular at the time. Hannah Hicks is paddling her father's canoe in the background, with another young friend double-blading a Dean Sunnyside cruiser. Other folks are enjoying the calm waters of the river in a rowing skiff and sleek racing scull. The young lad in the immediate foreground seems to be the happiest of the lot, enjoying himself in a wooden washtub. Hicks was also noted for building sailing canoes. A rare surviving sample, a double-masted wide-board canoe with torpedo-style stems, is estimated to have been built between 1915 and 1923. It belongs to the family of WCHA member David Darwin, who has graciously shared his extensive research history, construction details, and photographs at the following website. Elevated riverbanks and a lack of industrial development contributed to the Humber River's semi-wilderness feel. Canoeing the Humber became one of the must-do things for tourists visiting the city. A printed postcard of the Humber experience featured a relaxed scene of paddlers enjoying a gentle bend in the river. The beached all-wood canoe named Nellie pulled ashore in the foreground. Inked handwriting over a surviving 1908 copy of the postcard states, "This was the canoe I was in." The waters of the Humber River can be paddled about 1.5 miles upstream from its mouth, to where the first set of rapids form a natural impediment. At this location, the abandoned ruins of an old grist mill dated to 1840 formed a picturesque backdrop and was a popular spot for canoeists to disembark. O.L. Hicks's son, William, attempted to establish another livery location at the base of the ruins, but declining water levels in the old mill race run caused the business to be abandoned in 1925 for another location downstream. Today, Gamble's old mill has been converted into one of the city's most well-known inns, but the structure is obscured from the water by a thick tree canopy. The stone bridge leading to the mill is still present, however, and is a pleasant spot to visit by canoe, particularly in the fall when scores of salmon make their way to spawn upriver. With the inner harbor no longer conducive to regatta events, focus shifted to the Humber region, much to the benefit of the many liveries in this area. This photo of the event in 1922 reveals the mass of terrestrial and aquatic spectators enjoying the event. War canoe races would run upstream to the old mill ruins and back down to the mouth again. A photo from another regatta day shows crowds of spectators in their own paddling craft, lining the side of the marshy riverbank to watch all the action. But fate was not to be so kind to the canoe shops in the Humber area. Once again, the city government proposed infrastructure improvements, which ultimately meant properties being expropriated for urban development. This planning map from 1930 shows the cluster of buildings at the mouth of the Humber. Hicks's boat shops and other businesses were demolished to make way for the new Lakeshore Boulevard. Most of the remaining boathouses that survived this expropriation wipeout were heavily impacted when Hurricane Hazel slammed into the city in October of 1954, killing 81 people. The Humber, being a major drainage outlet, flooded with torrential rainfall, destroying homes and most livery businesses along the riverbanks. The final indignity occurred when the city began construction of the 6-lane Gardiner Expressway, beginning in 1955, eradicating any traces of these historic canoe shops. This, by the way, is the same structure built over the remains of the Toronto Canoe Club in the old Inner Harbor. Another sad example of the automobile destroying wooden canoe history. Despite all these historic losses, the city can still be a great place to paddle, with a surprising array of wildlife viewing opportunities. The Northern Lakes chapter has organized tours of the harbor, the islands, the Humber, and Sunnyside, and invites you to join us next time. All types of paddling watercraft are welcome. Keep in touch with planned events and chapter news by visiting our website, northernlakes.wcha.org. Additional resources for anyone wishing to explore more of Toronto's canoe history include the following publications and websites. Thank you for watching, and happy paddling.